be fun. And here we are tonight, folks, continuing our Oh Nurse month here in the spoiler room as we wind things down for 2024. And tonight we are looking at a star-filled comedy. I put it comedy from 2000, starring a lot of familiar names, 3 Academy Award winners, 1 Academy Award nominee, and it is called Nurse Betty. And joining me tonight is none other than my right-hand man who keeps coming back for more, Mr. Ian Simmons. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. This can be an interesting one to talk about for sure.
It is. It is. It looks like tonight it's just you and me, honey bunch, because some of our regulars are busy. So, yeah, Nurse Betty, did you want to try to give the synopsis for Nurse Betty as we pop our favorite drink?
Not enough scotch in this, Mark. Ooh, it's pure black coffee because I just finished watching Nurse Betty. No, it's Neil LaBute is a comedy dramedy. I don't know, a Tarantino knockoff that came out in 2000, and it's about a woman named Betty who's a waitress. She's obsessed with this soap opera, daytime soap, and more specifically, a doctor on it, played by Greg Kinnear, Dr. David.
Yes.
And she's in a small nowhere town in Kansas. She's married to a philandering, illicit substance dealing wannabe used car salesman, played by very early on Aaron Eckhart,
and his mullet.
Wow. Oh, he runs afoul of a gangster, and 2 of the gangsters' hitmen come to pay him a visit. One of those hitmen is played by Morgan Freeman, so you do get that wonderful moment where you realize, oh, it's Morgan Freeman overseeing the scalping of Harvey Dent, Lucius Fox and Harvey Dent together.
But a few years later, they wouldn't they? Yeah.
Yeah. So Betty witnesses the murder. She snaps. She has a mental break, and she comes to believe that she is actually a nurse at the fictitious hospital that her Greg Kinnear, Darling Beau, works at. So she kind of goes on the run to go find him, and she goes out to LA to go to the hospital that he allegedly works at. Runs into him at a social function because her new roommate. It's so complicated, Mark. They end up getting together. He thinks that she's an actress because she won't, quote unquote, break character when realizes she's just having a psychotic episode. And everything converges with the hitmen to Betty, to the TV doctor, to the real TV producer, to the hometown sheriff, to the hometown newspaper reporter, played by Crispin Glover, if you can imagine such a thing. And it all shakes out in the end. And they give her a closing title card as if this Betty was a real character, a real person, like they would do in a biopic. One of the strangest endings I've seen ever.
Go ahead. Go.
You put this movie on the list. I'm like, Nurse Betty. Oh, interesting. And then I pulled it up. I'm like, I went to Just Watch to make my plan to watch it. I'm like, oh no. I saw this movie when it came out 24 years ago.
Did you really?
In the theater, Mark.
You saw this in the theater, no less. You paid good money for it.
Uh-huh. And then I buried it. And like the Pet Cemetery, you made me bring it back up, and it tried to kill my family. Yeah, I hate this movie. Watching it again today, it did not improve my estimation of it. Although I do think Greg Kinnear is very good in it. But with Renee Zellweger, I couldn't get out of my head. It was some performer, it might have been Alexander Wentworth, on Mad TV years ago. Oh. They did like a Celebrity Family Feud with the cast of Cold Mountain when that movie came out, right around 2000, actually. Mm-hmm. And whoever they got to play Renee Zellweger just came out the kind of that puckered lemon face Sprite thing, and I couldn't get that out of my head. I'm like, that's what she does. But yeah, otherwise it's a great film.
This is an interesting one because I mean I had thought about it um until you mentioned Quentin Tarantino, because you're right, it has a bit of that Tarantino esque attempt here as far as your multiple characters and giving your like hitmen more layers than just being hitmen, and giving them a little more personality and everything. The thing is, I really enjoy parts of this. And then I told my wife I have I have issues, that they're necessarily a bad film or anything, but issues when the main character is awkward, is like in an awkward situation or being awkward, or where you could feel the awkwardness for them. And the problem I had for Nurse Betty is I felt this, like, when she gets to Hollywood, I just feel the awkwardness for her from, like, there out, because I'm like, she's everybody's taking her as a fake trying to be a method. I'm like, "No, there is something seriously, she needs help," and I just felt awkward for her because she, in her world, all of this is reality. She's in the soap opera world, and everybody else is kinda chuckling and going along with it, but you feel awkward for her so much, especially near the end when they decide to take advantage of her. Basically, Hollywood does. For me, I think I enjoyed it more than you. I didn't
If you enjoyed
because
it all, Mark, then you
I
enjoyed it more than me.
I okay. Well, I enjoyed it then. I enjoyed it more than you, but I enjoyed parts of it more than the other, and the toughest part is this film does feels like it doesn't know what it wants to be, and that is at its core. I think its core problem is you have all this wonderful talent, and they are doing their roles really good because they're talented folks. I mean, Chris Rock actually gets to play kind of a straight guy and a straight man in this. I mean, he still has his comical jokes in that, but it's one of the darker characters that we've seen him play, at least earlier on in his career. And I was like, wow, but the tone and the theme of this film, you're just not sure how to take it. You're like, when you realize she's actually suffering from an actual psychotic break, it makes the other stuff a little less like, ha ha. It's not like she is, it's like the reasoning behind her delusion is so dark that it's hard to find the ha ha in some of the stuff, especially when she gets to meet Greg Kinnear's character, and she gets into the Hollywood circle, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, and that's about 20 minutes before the movie was over, I paused it. I looked up the trailer because kind of like what we used to do, we would like talk about how accurate was the trailer to the
Yeah.
movie.
Mhm.
Have you watched the trailer for this?
I did not watch the trailer. Oh, no, yeah, I did watch the trailer for this.
Okay,
Yeah, it's
before or after you watched the movie?
before I watched the movie.
Oh, because you watch it and you're like, Betty's a small time waitress. She's a big fan of the soap operas, but her husband is in bad stuff. And there's the hitman and the TV soap doctor and the producer. And it just sounds like this kind of a screwball, early
Right.
2000s farce. And it's not that, because that's what the frustrating thing about Neil LaBoute's film is, that it tries to be that kind of wacky crime offbeat, getting to know the hitman a bit better type of thing, but then getting into the violence of Tarantino, but also crossing over into some real world traumatic stuff. I mean, in addition to Betty having this break and then having a nervous breakdown on the set when she's confronted with the reality that, she is not actually a nurse and she's on a TV set instead of an actual hospital. Morgan Freeman as the, I've got this one last job before I retire hitman. First of all, please. But second of all, out of nowhere, he develops this infatuation with Betty, and he starts to have a bit of a break because he's getting really defensive whenever someone says anything bad about her. He's applying motives to her that he could not possibly understand, except he believes that she's like the greatest person ever. And also, he goes to visit the Grand Canyon, ends up dancing with her in because like illusory dream states. You're like, okay, now he's going through some kind of a trauma, and none of this is funny. The only thing I can
No.
think of, it's kinda like, you go back 24 years ago before people had much more of a sensitivity or a focus to mental conditions and portraying those on film. It's like, it's kind of a gag, isn't it? I mean, she's had some kind of a psychotic break." I'm like, "Well, it's not inherently funny, and you need to either treat it with absolute respect or no respect. You can't
Mhm.
dance that line because it doesn't work." You're cringing when you should be laughing, and when you're laughing, you're like, "I don't know if this is actually funny. I wanna
And
see the door."
and then, like I said, that's where that awkwardness came into when she started meeting, the David Ravel character, and you get his producer, who's played by, Allison
Allison Janney.
Janney. She shows up here. Like I said, everybody. Pruitt Taylor Vince plays the local sheriff in here. I mean, you've got so many names in this film. It's crazy. Familiar faces in that. Kathleen Wilhoit shows up in here as well. I like every turn when you open in the first like 15 minutes of this movie. I'm like, literally the Leonardo DiCaprio mean of, oh, you recognize all these faces, so you have all this talent, so it's not a lack of talent, it's a screenplay. You're right. I If it would have leaned completely into screwball comedy, it would have worked better, but there's such a dark setup to why she is how she is. I thought, because with the trailer and even with the description, because yes, folks, this is the spoiler room, we've already spoiled it, but um it just says she's a widow who becomes obsessed with a soap opera star and goes off to try to meet him or whatever. I'm like,
That's right. Yeah.
that's how it's sold. And I'm like, oh, okay. And they don't really hint at all in the trailer, uh, really who Charlie and Wesley are, Morgan Freeman and Chris Rock's character are, that they're actually hitmen, like, you know, actual effective hitmen. Their characters are played. You think, oh, they're kind of ha ha. They're going to be kind of the bumbling or just the always on the tail of Betty, who just wants to go meet her soap opera star. I thought that's what it was going to be, but the death of Dell, her husband, Aaron Eckhart, is actually rather dark and brutal. Though they try to kind of play it comedic, you're just like, Jesus.
Well, what it is it's a ham-handed version of Pulp Fiction where, "Oh, I just think I shot Marvin in the face."
Yeah,
It's an
yeah.
accidental killing that then they have to go and clean up the mess. Um, you know, Aaron
But it's
Eckhart's Dell character, he complains that everybody in the town is stupid, and so Morgan Freeman says, "Well, give me an example," and we get into this very Tarantino-esque
yeah.
dialogue about,
Mhm.
like, Native American heritage and scalping and stuff, and then
Yeah.
Chris Rock, actually scalps the guy, but Morgan Freeman had intended for him to just, scare him a little bit, but it went on to this full thing, and Freeman has to put 2 bullets in the guy to keep him from rampaging and storming out of the house, essentially. And that sets off this whole series of events. Now, I get it, but it is a testament to how you have to be Quentin Tarantino or the Coen brothers, because this
Mhm.
movie is also a very Coen brothers-esque
Oh, yeah.
wannabe type of film.
Yeah.
Um, but you can't just have random violence in the middle of a comedic scene unless you are able to walk that fine line. And Neil Blue, I can't
Well
say his name, and he can't do this either.
well, the problem is it goes too long. The shot Marvin in the face was quick. I mean, it's a quick blink, and then they have the conversation. And while it's still going on, you immediately here we have the kind of comedic conversation first, but this scene goes on for a while, and you think, you have the scalping part, which Chris Rock is actually playing it the way he's screaming, and it's just the way everybody's directed in this. It's gotta be. It's almost like he's actually, a bit surprised, but not like funny surprised. And then Eckhart is like smashes himself into a cabinet and tries to run. And then, Morgan Freeman's like, oh crap. And he shoots the guy. And there's actually a burst of blood. And then he tries to go this way and he shoots him again. And it's like there's this quiet moment. I'm like, what the fuck? And then also they are portrayed, they're showing Betty watching this more or less from her hidden part. She's observing this. And the thing is, they set up Betty as such the innocent, because we got to meet her in the cafe first, as this very sweet, innocent, small town person, who is married to an asshole who treats her like crap. But you figure, okay, she probably figures, of the choices in town, whatever. She, for whatever reason, she actually cares for her husband. And yeah, having this happen to someone you try to portray sweet also is too dark to try to make haha with the way they direct it too, because she's staring at the screen and suddenly she has her snap, and they portray her snap rather serious. And I'm like, is this supposed to be a comedy? Because as of right now, I'm not finding any of this funny. And then I found even less of it funny when people were ignoring she obviously has an issue, and that was like when we got to the Hollywood part, I was like, she has an issue. None of them either are acknowledging it or whatnot, because even if you are method or whatnot, they're that clueless, and they're trying to play the cluelessness off as comedy, but it doesn't. It's awkwardness. And that's what I was talking about. That awkwardness builds up so much that by the time you get to that part where he's giving her the break on set after he's had sex with her, mind you, they kind of breeze past that, but he you're like, I feel way too awkward for this to be finding this any type of anything.
Well, it's also, confusing because I like Greg Kinnear in this. It just
Yeah.
reminds me of how good an actor he was, especially coming from Talk Soup. I mean,
Mhm.
you wouldn't think.
Yeah.
But this is kind of in his sweet spot, the late 90s, early 2000s.
Mhm.
And he took some, kind of interesting roles more than just like, I'm just going to be the rom-com guy. He did stuff that was funny. He was great in Mystery Men and As Good as It Gets and all that stuff. But here, it's confusing because he falls for Betty. He can't quite figure out if there's something wrong with her, if she's just committed to the bit and really wants to get the part on this soap opera, which seems like a strange
Way
goal
to
to
do that.
have for moving out to Hollywood. Like, I don't want to be on the big screen. I want to be in a soap opera. But at the end, or towards the end, when he encounters the hitmen, they're kind of posing as cops or whatever, and
Yeah.
they're questioning him, and he says like, yeah, this kind of thing happens to me all the time, like, or something like,
Yeah.
I could tell you stories. I'm like, that does not match up with a guy who's gonna, casually have some lady who's convinced that she's in the soap opera coming up, and he's gonna take her out and sleep with her and show all this interest. If it happens all the time, you should see all these red flags and make sure that security does not let her get within 50 feet of you.
Yeah. And again, that's just the unevenness. It's like it feels like they were trying to pull out these twists or surprises or the gotchas or whatnot with these characters. Like, nope, nope, it's not actually following this trope. Oh wait, we are, but no, we're not. And it's like I would have rathered it being zany to where she was just a small town person who became obsessed with, Greg Kadir's character and wants to go out and meet him. And, not for acting or anything, but she's just, that's how much she's crazy about him. She wants to go out there, uh, versus what we get, which is this in between, or have it a little more serious, have it a little bit, don't play your laughs out there. Play it with the darker elements, without the dancing at the Grand Canyon, and and having her people around her just humor her when she obviously has something going on to even the most, un, un unaware person of mental conditions would be able to realize within a minute that, oh honey, we need to get you help is what we need.
Well, on top of that, you've got this really weird jag when she gets out to LA and she gets this roommate
Yeah.
at the hospital, right? Excuse me. I think she worked at I can't remember. I
No,
watched this
she
movie today and
she
it's already
she no. What had
she's a
happened was
paralegal, right? Something like that.
she's a paralegal, but what had happened was, in again, what is this movie?
Oh, the parking lot shootout,
Nurse
right?
Betty tries to get a job as a nurse with a resume because she thinks she's a nurse. And the person who runs the head of the department's like, I can't hire you. You have absolutely no credentials whatsoever. And yeah, just leave. And so she leaves a little disillusioned. And then I know it's LA, okay? But we suddenly get this car drive up and they dump a dead body out on the floor, and then they back up and run into the ambulance, and then there's this shootout with the cops. A guy holds a gun, and the thing is, you're like, oh, this is maybe they're shooting a movie in front of the hospital that no, this is a real life situation. And what it is her roommate, Rosa, her roommate that she ended up rooming with, it was her brother in the ambulance who was suffering from a bullet wound, and she's like, someone needs to help me. So Betty, thinking she's a nurse, goes into the back of the ambulance and does an emergency, basically tube into the chest sort of thing, because that pressure was building up and collapsing his lungs. And that was enough to get the head of the nurse department to get her a job in the pharmacy, and it put her in good graces enough with the woman, because it was her brother, to have her room with her.
Yeah, and she's like, "Yeah, just work in the pharmacy until we get
Your
your
credentials.
credentials, your references in." I'm like, "No, you can't just have some psycho walking off the street and say, 'Yeah, go work in the pharmacy,' until we figure out who you are." But yeah, but my point about the roommate is like she gets Betty's story about like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I'm in love with this doctor," and this whole thing, and then when she's, in her talking to her boss lawyer, she's describing the hospital and the doctor, and the lawyer's like, "Oh, that's from that soap opera."
Mm.
So the roommate now, Rosa, is pissed,
Yeah.
but she keeps letting Betty live with her and kind of like messes with her head. That's why Betty gets to go to this, big ball where she actually meets David, the guy who plays David, whatever, Gary or whatever the hell
Yeah.
his name is.
Yeah.
Um, but she's like, "Yeah, you go to this ball, it's gonna completely shatter your illusions." Instead of just kicking around the street like, "You're a liar, I don't know who you are, and, you're crazy," she keeps, like, needling her, and throughout the entire rest of the movie, you're like, "Why are you making this girl your kind of revenge project?" I don't know what's going on with this character.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Again, I think it was them trying maybe some kind of satirical look at people in Hollywood, maybe.
I
You
don't
you
know.
know what I mean? But doing it poorly. You know what I'm saying? And that's the thing is, I think part of the Hollywood thing, like with the way the producer is and everything when they meet her, I think it's them trying to do like a statement about Hollywood and that, but failing miserably in the messaging, the actual portrayal of what they're trying to get across. It's done so almost too nuanced, but at the same time, it's like, okay, are you trying to say that everyone in Hollywood is such and such? Because I get that, but that's not how you're directing this movie. It especially the way it starts. Again, it feels like it has no identity whatsoever.
kind of like Betty.
Kind of like
It's
Betty. So I
the
guess
whole
that is,
thing is the
yeah,
yeah metaphor.
yeah,
Yeah.
metaphor. There you go. What's a
Um,
metaphor for pooping? No, sorry.
Hey, well, speaking of which, when they go to that big gala, one of the hangers on in the little entourage is Stephen Culp, I think,
Oh
who I
yeah,
recognized. He was from Jason Goes to Hell, the final
yes,
Friday. So like that was something. I didn't pick that up the first time I watched it. Um, but no, like the ingredients to a better version of this movie are here if you make it a straight comedy. Like leave out
yeah,
the death of the husband. Like maybe she's obsessed with soap operas. She realizes that her husband is a no good philandering cheat. She just walks out on him and takes the first bus to LA because she's going to pursue her dreams of acting. And there's like a casting call and it's for this soap opera and she gets on and she gets
yeah.
to be with the man of her dreams and just like getting caught up in this soap opera world or something. But you leave out all the hitman nonsense because none of it really works. It just makes everything kind of muddy and ugly. The one bit of clever, I guess, editing, and I don't know if this is intentional, but when the two hitmen go to that bar, I don't know if it was in Texas or Arizona,
Oh,
but the
Arizona, yeah.
bartender, okay, the bartender, she's like, I've never seen this woman in my life, and the one drunk at the bar is like, oh yeah, it's Betty. She was in here the other day. Um, Morgan Freeman like kind of grabs her by the lapels and says, "You haven't been honest with us." And it cuts to what looks like a splash. It's like a giant bright splash. It almost looks like blood, but then you realize it's just the red traffic lights because when they cut to whoever it is driving through a tunnel, I think in
Right. Yep.
LA,
Hmm.
like, oh, that red splash, does that imply that they killed the waitress or the bartender or whatever? That's kind of interesting. They never revisit those characters or even mention them
Hmm.
again, so it's probably just an accident. But it's just so frustrating. Like this movie wants to be kind of highfalutin and cool. I know LeBute had done some critically acclaimed kind of dramas before this, but this was kind of his step into the big Hollywood mainstream. All the stars are in my movie, and it's a dud. The same thing we've seen happen with countless directors before.
Well, and a few years later, he'd make that wonderful film that was snubbed by the Academy in so many categories, The Wicker Man with Mr. Nicolas Cage.
I forgot that he did The Wicker Man.
Yes.
I take back every negative thing I've said about Neil LaBute.
He did The Wicker Man. He screenplay and directed, I believe. Uh, but that was a couple of years later. So he learned from this film, maybe.
How to
I don't
make a
know
good movie, yeah.
how to make a good movie. Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I see hints and glimpses here, or even if you had it to where her husband was dead, say her husband died in an accident or whatnot.
Died on
eh,
top of his secretary. That's the other
Or
trope,
on
you
top
know?
of his, see, I thought that's where they were going because when the description says her husband died, she's acting all sweet, and you're like, the way she talked about her husband before you even cut to it, you're like, he's going to be a scumbag. And Aaron Eckhart, to his defense, he plays it very well. I'm like, you look at him, you go, wait, that's the suave looking Aaron Eckhart because he is looking like seriously like trash in this movie.
Oh, yeah, I mean, because this was I know he really leaned into that kinda chiseled Hollywood guy,
Yeah.
like, around and, after The Dark Knight, sure, but, yeah, to see him go this off the wall and be completely without vanity, I'm like, I believe that mohawk or
The
the
mullet.
mullet was shaved into his head. That didn't look like a hairpiece.
That did not look like a hairpiece at all. No, he totally went method with his mullet. Method mullet. There you go. Or the mullet method. There you go.
There's
You can get a whole
method to
book.
this mullet, yeah.
There's method to the mullet. Yeah, had they leaned in, had that the way it been, I think it would have been. You could have still pulled it off. Hell, you could have even done some. And here we are again, the spoiler room ritual of rewriting a film we didn't quite care for as a better film. You could even gone into her soap opera delusion to where, as she's taking her travels and meeting this wide swath of various characters, occasionally dumping into, say, soap opera world to where everything's over exaggerated a bit and, funky music or whatnot. And then you cut, and she's like, oh, no, something like that. Like she keeps popping into seeing everything like a soap opera on her way to the soap opera guy because she's been lonely or whatever from her being a widow with her husband, or her husband say died in an accident or whatever. But whatever, you could have done it in a different way. Now, granted, that means you don't have the hitmen, but you could still have the hitmen. But instead of having them as hitmen, just have them be the retrievers of the drugs in the trunk. They didn't necessarily need to be like actual hitmen assassins. They could have just been guys sent to retrieve.
Or, just have them be cops.
Or be cops.
They're
Yeah,
they're feds
evidence.
investigating the cocaine as a federal crime or something like that, and they've gotta go find her because they believe that she's connected or that she's in danger. Turn them into good guys. It was kind of interesting at the end when it turns out that Morgan Freeman and Chris Rock are father and son.
Though,
Um,
I saw that coming.
I
I know you did. You have to care. I know in
yeah.
order to see. But in all honesty, after the scalp scene, I'm like, oh, I bet you they're father and son. And I was just waiting for it. And then at the end, I'm like, yep, there it is.
Well, the thing is, like, I like that Chris Rock sometimes tries to go dramatic.
Yeah.
I don't like the results of when he does.
No.
Because like when he's screaming, "Daddy," I'm like, "Oh no." Um, and then, of course, because they have to make sure that everybody in the audience understands the relationship, Morgan Freeman is like, "My son's dead. They just shot my son. I can't believe my son died." I'm like, it was special
well,
until it wasn't.
Well, see, and there's another thing too, where if you're gonna go lean into this Tarantino-esque angle, fucking go true romance, okay? Don't go goofy, go deep. If you're gonna do dark like he did with some of the scenes, go true romance. I thought he was with with the uh Morgan Freeman's character. I keep forgetting his name.
Charlie?
Charlie, I think. Yeah, Charlie. When Charlie sits there and he realizes his son has died, and he looks at Betty and goes, my son's, I'm here because of you. My son was here because of you. My son is dead now. I'm like, oh, we're going to go back to being dark now. He's going to try to shoot her or attack her or something, or just, because, it's Morgan Freeman. He even had that look on his face. And then I'm like, oh, here we go. But we don't. And I'm like, what are you? I asked this film, what are you? Because I'm loving each individual characters. I'm loving the portrayals because this is all talented folks. I wish they were in a better story, because these are interesting performances by these actors, but they need to be in a better story. I mean, when Crispin Glover showed up as a reporter, I'm like, oh shit, Crispin's in this. Okay.
It would have been better as a cameo because when him and
Yeah.
Pruitt Taylor Vince show up at the end, I'm like, "Oh no, here we go again."
See,
'Cause
and that even made littler sense, those two showing up at her door. I'm like, why are we bringing them back into it?
so that you mentioned True Romance, and I wrote that down in my notes. I mean,
Yeah.
that's that whole climax in the hotel room or the
Mhm.
apartment or whatever. That was that same thing. People start shooting and they're ducking into rooms, and people are dying or getting wounded. It's again, it just the whole thing feels like a sloppy knockoff, and it feels like someone who watched those movies and wanted to make those movies didn't understand why those movies
I
worked.
I did dig soap opera within the movie, though. I liked that quite a bit. I thought they played to that fairly well. I'm like, I've watched enough soap operas. I'm like, okay, this is fun. They're doing just. I'm like, I can get behind this. I thought it felt like a, you know, not one of the top tier soap operas. Yes, I used to watch soap operas, folks. Don't- Hey, when you hear a main
No,
soap opera character gets possessed by a devil, I'm like, what? Yes, Marlene from Days of Our Lives gets possessed by a devil. I'm like, what storyline is this? And my wife said, sit down. This was when, earlier in our marriage. And I'm like, okay. And then when I would be home with her, when there was a doctor's appointment, because she'd be pregnant with one of our, with our oldest, we'd sit down and I'd watch it. And then I got sucked into it because I'm like, I got to see how the possession happens. So, okay. So I've watched soap operas, and I will say they captured the spirit of soap opera quite a bit. And everybody played those parts very well. I found that humorous.
It was pretty well done. I mean, and I thought it was interesting once we got onto that soap opera set, and it it was cool to see what broke Betty out of her kind of delusion was,
Mhm.
the camera kind of pushes out at her as it's, rolling out from behind a wall, and it all becomes very overwhelming. And it's like the reality she's in is crumbling and being replaced by this other reality, and you got this guy screaming at her. It was a kind of a cool moment, but it belonged in a different movie,
Right.
probably an actual drama. Um, but yeah, the soap stuff, I mean, my wife still watches, General Hospital, which is still on the air. So every once in a while, I'll sit down and watch. I'm like, I don't know how the hell you watch this nonsense, but I can also see that it's so bad, it's compelling, and you notice the tropes. Like, I think, Matt LeBlanc popularized this on Friends back in the 90s, what they called smell the fart acting. Do you remember that line? Where it's
Yeah.
like every scene in the soap opera has to end with a character going
Yeah.
like that. Um,
Yeah.
Also, I've noticed watching General Hospital, this is a sidebar, but
Yeah.
every scene, I'd say 9 out of 10 scenes ends up with a slow, dramatic close up of somebody.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
not just that
Yeah.
it cuts, it's like,
Oh, yeah, there's the dramatic close up, there's the headshots, the reactionary shots that you get, and oh, yeah, it's a number of tropes. I
but I
mean,
didn't realize it was that bad. I mean, they're cartoons of themselves, but I will say, yeah, you're right. But I also like the rehearsal scene
yeah,
because there was something going on there where you had the seasoned old doctor and then the blonde who's kind of like leaning on his shoulder. And
yeah,
when they yell action, she's just kind of like speeding through her lines. And then, but he's really delivering the part. So you get these contrasts, like the veteran actor and then the young ingenue just wants to get over with because it's not the real take.
yeah.
Unspoken, but it's like, oh, that's a level of detail I wasn't expecting in this movie.
Right, well, and again, that's the thing is there's fits and spurts in this film where you're like, "Oh, okay, I like this, I wish it wasn't a better story," because at its core, I mean, this is we've mentioned it with some other films in the past on the show, but and you've heard probably many people, if you follow any filmmaker circles, your backbone to a film is a good story. If you don't
Mhm.
have a good story, regardless of how much talent and how much you put in front of it, you'll be harder pressed for sure to get a decent movie out of it if you don't have at least a good story or a decent screenplay. And that's what this film doesn't have. Its screenplay just is like throwing pasta at the wall, seeing what sticks almost, and it's funny because of all this talent. You could tell everybody's trying to make the most of it, but if you're actually paying attention to this story, there's just so much problematic stuff.
Yeah. Oh,
And it just it rolls right along, and especially the ending too. We literally get Christopher Nolan stole the end of The Dark Knight Rises from Nurse Betty.
they do need to do a cut
Damn.
where you see fucking Michael Caine just, like, waving at Renee Zellweger.
Damn it, I should have waited to say that until you took your drink. I'm just like, seriously, the way it was framed and the way that whole little last segment played out, I'm like, why does this feel like the end of The Dark Knight Rises?
The Dark Nurse
The
Rises.
Dark Nurse Rises. Yeah, that yeah, there you go. You know,
That's the parody. Someone on YouTube is gonna intercut those 2 endings together to make the ultimate cut.
it would go together, and she, like, and what's hilarious is, in the resolution of things too, you find out she does actually get a part with the asshole character, played by Greg Kinnear. She's actually on TV,
For
um,
63 episodes.
for 63 episodes. Yeah, this weird end title card with a summary of, that she was actually on the soap opera for 63 episodes. I'm like, and then she visited Europe, the Europe in quotes too. And I'm like, what? What
Well
is,
well,
why are we?
that was the callback to, the friend who had gone to Europe, and
Oh,
she
that's
said that
right.
was like the she's like, "I
Yeah,
went to the Europe."
the Europe. That's right.
And that's the you know, that's part of the thing that bugged me about this movie is it's so kind of it wants to have that nuance, that drama, but in other respects, it's so cartoonish and stereotypical. Um, like we don't know anything about Betty really, aside from what we can probably imply from the situation that we find her in. But she's such a blank slate from beginning to end that it
Hmm.
almost doesn't matter that she had a break because I'm like, well, I didn't know her to begin with. So, um, why did she never escape that town? When Morgan Freeman says, you don't need anybody, you don't need a man, you don't need whatever. I'm like, well, maybe she kind of does because she doesn't seem to have any other kind of agency in this film. I don't believe that she's, coming out from a psychotic break does not necessarily imbue you with wisdom or knowledge or worldliness. So when she's in Italy, I'm like, or wherever the hell she was at the end of this movie, I'm like, well, what's she doing there? What's she gonna do? How's she gonna get around? There's too many gaps here. I want to see a movie about the real Betty rather than the shell that we're kind of presented with.
Yeah, well, you don't get character moments with her. You get her in the cafe and her obsession with the soap opera, which actually there's it's a wonderful opening scene. It was even in the trailer. The scene where she's watching the soap opera and she ends up serving Morgan Freeman coffee, and ends up pouring it in the cup while still looking at the TV. I love that little bit. Again, certain segments I really enjoyed. In fact, it was an interesting little segment interaction between her and Morgan and Chris Rock. These three characters, in the beginning, because we learn later on who Charlie, Charlie and his son, who they really are. They're actually the ones doing deals with her husband, which I thought again was an interesting twist. Wesley was Chris Rock's character's name. Again, that was something interesting. I'm like, okay, where are we going with this? And but then it's like, no, now we're gonna do dark things, and she's gonna have a psychotic break. But there's not a huge difference between her psychotic break and not psychotic break, outside of now she's talking about the soap opera instead of her husband. But it's like there wasn't a whole lot of separation there either. And I was like, I would have loved to see a moment to where, her husband after the dinner, like when he says, "Oh, I'm going to be out really late," expecting her to be out, and he treats her, "Oh, clean this up," and just being the a-hole husband, having a character moment with her, like either having her look at a picture, of something of happier times or something, but she is
Right.
still like buying into that this relationship is working.
Right. I mean, that's the thing is like in movies like this, you wonder how do these people get together? You had mentioned, oh, well, it's a small town. She probably doesn't have any prospects. I'm like, well, she could have just been alone. I mean, you really need to dig into like, well, my parents pressured me into it because like, well, you're never going to find anybody in this town. Or he used to be nice until he got a back injury and his football career ended and all he can do is sell cars. That and he became bitter. There's an evolution or a de-evolution of the relationship because I'm just sitting there wondering, what are you doing?
Mhm.
Morgan Freeman in that same speech where he said, you don't need anybody, you don't need a man. He's like, this isn't the 40s. I'm like, yes, it's not the 1940s. the Kansas in the year 2000 still had internet. You know, there are options. There's a possibility of education. So if I'm sitting there wondering what kind of character you are because you're refusing to tell me, that helps me stay
And
detached from the film. What this movie could have been is sort of a soap opera take on Peggy Sue Got Married,
yeah,
where she finds her husband cheating and she runs out of the house in disgust and she falls and she hits her head and then she wakes up in the hospital and it turns out she's Nurse Betty who had an accident in the hospital and she's in the reality of this soap opera, and through that she works out what she's been doing with her life, and
hmm
then she wakes up and she decides to leave her husband, something like that. You take out most of this garbage, you end up with something kind of approximating the trailer that this movie was selling, or the movie that trailer was selling. You make a much better film, a funny one.
you make a funny one, and or you stick more with Charlie and Wesley. I mean, there's an interesting story there between these two interesting characters enough that we see. I'm like, I want to know more about these two because there's an interesting dynamic between them, talking about professional and not professionalism and all this. And you're like, okay, but we just get them in little brief vignettes, basically. and
Well,
the,
no, but kind of to your point, Mark, take them completely out of this movie and make one. You might know this because I'm blanking on it, but have we had, aside from like Leon the Professional, which is a different
right.
kind of thing, but if we had we used to have a father son mentor mentee hitman couple, like I'm going to show you the ropes. We've seen that with cops and we've seen that with other professions, but I'd like to see a movie where these two play a father and son, and father, the only way they can bond because dad was always away on business, so the son wants to go into the business to be like dad, and dad's like, I'm going to retire, so this is my legacy, but maybe I don't actually want you to become a soulless monster like I am. Make that movie. I'll watch that. Turn it into a drama.
With these
Sold.
two characters, with these
Yes.
two actors even. I mean,
Hmm.
I think because I liked the banter, and I actually liked, Morgan and Chris Rock together. I think these 2 actually played off each other fairly well,
Hmm.
in their scenes, but that's not what this movie is, and then you're just like, "Okay, well, how am I supposed to feel about this?" Because then, like I said, you get the you get that scene where after Dr. our David Ravel, our Gordon guy, he realizes what Betty might be doing before he decides to put her on set to see if she could still stay in method. He visits her, I think, without his producer's knowledge. Um, and he takes advantage of her. And so, and I'm like sitting here going, this isn't playing like I think you think it's played off as, director. Not at all in this situation. Even for 2000, this film, there's problematic things in here too, where you're just like, No, no, no." I mean, I, I, you don't look at, you don't have a scene like that and then have him be nicey nicey to Betty and you going, "Oh, okay, maybe these two will still, be with each other." No. You don't. And
Yeah, I
that
mean, but kind of something that you're picking up on there. Like, what if they developed a relationship and he genuinely thought that she was, an actress or whatever and
yeah,
didn't have any kind of mental problems, and they slept together, and then later when it comes out that she had had this mental break, he feels terrible about it because, like, oh my God, I took advantage of you. Maybe
yeah.
that's more of a 2024 sensibility or something, but it would have added something to what's going on with these characters. Um, yeah, it's just I hate this, Mark. We've written 6 movies here on this live stream
Well,
that are better than the one we're actually discussing.
and again, that's because and all of these are spawning from the different plot points and ideas and scenarios we are shown in this film, but it keeps taking this turn to try to decide to be something else. And that's the thing. So by the end of it, okay, great. It's great that she came out of it, that she got a job, that she was able to see Europe. That's really great. I'm like, how we got here though, it was up and down for me. It really was. I'm like, I don't get the angle. I still though do not get the angle of what they were trying to go for with Charlie obsession with Betty. It wasn't, it was kind of implied romantical, yet not. If it was romantical, the logistics and the whole scenario with it being logical makes you kind of go, oh, it's just that part of his character I didn't understand, and it wasn't needed. It really, I understand making him maybe trying to be a little softer on his last job because he's gotten older and that, and he realizes, just what he's done over the years. That angle I can see. The obsession with Betty didn't make sense. I tried to wrap my head around it every time it was coming up, and I couldn't. I'm like, if you're trying to do a parallel with her obsession with the doctor as his obsession with her, you're doing it very badly.
I feel like that's kind of what they were going for because, people get wrapped up in these soap operas. They start thinking these characters as real people and ascribing motives like, oh, Dr. David would never do that. It is kind of that same parallel track, but it doesn't make any sense. And it's just introduced out of absolute nowhere. I mean, you can see in the opening diner scene that Morgan Freeman is kind of charmed by Betty or impressed with the whole like coffee pouring
Yeah,
skill
amused.
thing.
He's
He's
amused.
amused. That's a great word for it.
He's
Um,
amused by Betty because he's in this small town, and here's this person who, she does some very adorable things, and he's just amused by her because this is a small town and he didn't maybe expect someone like that.
right. But that's a long way away from, hey, I'm in love with you for some reason. Especially because, like, when it comes out that it's father and son, there's no mention. Like, you'd think at some point Chris Rock's character would say, I can't believe you're obsessed over this, you know, as they keep referring to her like this, stupid suburban white chick,
Yeah.
homemaker. That there's a lot of denigrating language in this movie I didn't quite appreciate. But like, you how could you think about this? Well, what about mom? Like is
Yeah.
mom dead? Is she still alive? What's going on? Is that sort of like an emotional cheating thing going on? But yeah, the whole father and son thing that calls into question that whole third or fourth subplot about the romantic interest.
Yeah. Well, and what also complicates things is time frame, passage of time in here.
Yeah.
Um, it's implied that she had been missing for a while and that they were looking for her for a while. It's not like a day or 2. You get the impression they've been, because they complained about how she's, "You've dragged me all over this country," and I'm like, you've gotta be talking at least a couple few weeks where she was rooming, and then when she was
Oh, because
talking to
they're
her
driving. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and when she was talking to her roommate after they had the fight or whatnot, she's like, "Oh, this is ridiculous. You come home, I go to the kitchen. I come home, you go to the kitchen." It's like this has been going on for a while. It's sort of like, just how long has she been
Well, yeah, because I mean, she's completely moved in. It's not like you see,
Yeah,
not that she would have boxes because she's coming from basically nothing, but yeah, she's all settled into this place. So yeah, I don't know if this has been going on for months, which, maybe if there's a longer movie or if it was more focused, you could see how uh, Charlie became obsessed or became infatuated
right.
with Betty by going on this trail and learning more about her from the people that they encounter, like loved ones or something. Oh, she's got a good heart or whatever. But
Mhm.
no, it's just yeah, it's just more plot.
That's what you needed in here to sell the idea of Charlie getting soft about Betty is him interviewing more people and everyone just talking adoringly about her when he thinks she's run away with the drugs that they're trying to get down. Like she's actually, being sneaky. And then as he learns more and more about just how much of an innocent she is, you're right, that softens him up to her. Maybe you get a few more scenes like that. Apparently, there was a scene involving a racist trucker that got cut. That gets cut. that that apparently got cut. Who was it? Christopher McDonald was the racist
Oh,
trucker.
all
Uh,
right.
and that scene got cut for the Christopher McDonald, aka not Joe Piscopo, Joe Piscopo, but
Hey, Mark, here's the eighth movie that's coming out of this Nurse Betty. All right, you've got Morgan Freeman and Chris Rock are federal agents on the run or in pursuit of this woman who's pretending to be a nurse, and it's kind of like a Bill Bixby Incredible Hulk situation where she's
sure,
traveling across. It's like the opposite of Nurse 3D, where she's going around just like showing up and helping people, even though she's not a licensed
sure,
nurse. She's always wanted to be, or maybe she watched so many soaps she thought she was. And as they go to these different scenes and hear these stories about this person who helped out, Morgan Freeman gets a crush on Nurse Betty. And then at the end, it's the big dilemma of like, I don't want to have to bring you in, but I got to because you're practicing without a license. Make it into a farce or a romantic
yeah.
comedy, something completely stupid, but
That's another thing you could have done with the story. And the trailer totally made it look like it was this kind of bumbling like crime thing, like crime comedy of sorts. It really tries to play into the comedy part of it, like how she becomes obsessed even with it is totally misleading in that trailer.
can you imagine if they just did a random insert of Aaron Eckhart freshly scalped, just like screaming in agony?
Yeah. So yeah, Nurse Betty is an interesting film. Well, I didn't hate it um or despise it. I didn't mind watching it because I liked all the talent in it. By the end of it, I thought to myself, what is this movie? You know, and if you're asking yourself, what is this movie? It's one of those things. Well, I'm not gonna watch it again. Uh, but it's one of those where it tells you that it felt like they didn't know what they were doing with this or what they wanted to exactly. And that's the thing is, had they leaned just one inch way one way or the other, I think you've got yourself a better film, as we've discussed tonight. It's just where it lands. Yeah, unfortunately, I can't recommend it. I know what you're going to say, but your final thought with Nurse Beth.
Well, it just occurred to me because I was thinking about other Tarantino movies, and he wrote the original screenplay for Natural Born Killers, and Pruitt Taylor Vince shows up in that movie as one of the security guards.
There you go.
Um, so I'm just thinking about those connections, but how you could totally see. I think this is a Universal picture in some other company or something like that. How in the year 2000, they're 6 years away from Pulp Fiction, but everybody's still riding that crest. There are so many
Yeah.
knockoffs of that movie. They're like, we want our own version of that. We don't really care. This movie's wacky and it's gritty, but it's also funny. I don't quite get it, but it's kind of that Tarantino thing. I'm just like doing the stand-in for the executive. Yeah, just here's $10 million. Go make your movie and we'll put it out. With no quality control. That's what this felt like.
No quality control whatsoever. Though I came up with a wonderful, wonderful buddy cop film. Hear me
Okay.
out. Hear me out.
This is movie number 9.
Number 9. Well, it involves one person who's in this film and one who isn't, but you just mentioned him playing a cop, and I realized he did play a lot of cops just like another actor, Reginald Vell Johnson and Pruitt Taylor Vince in a buddy cop film.
You know, it's almost like because I didn't think about that until you mentioned it, but their physiognomy, they're so similar. But I could just see this being like a weird like cop race swap comedy where they inhabit each other's bodies or something. I don't know.
Oh my god, it's another, what was that one? Critical, uh the heart attack one, because they had that body swapping one for a while. Uh,
Heart
uh,
Condition
Heart Condition, I think it
with
was.
Bob Hoskins?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Where he's a racist and he gets a African American heart. I think it was. I believe that's how it played out. Uh,
I'd watch that movie, yeah.
I think that's what it was. I don't know. There were a number of those body swap movies that I yeah, it's yeah, I want to see that though. I want to see Reginald Johnson and Pruitt in a cop film. That's what I want to see. But yeah, Nurse Betty, folks. It's there. If you like these people, you could see it. Um, just don't expect what you saw maybe in the trailer, what you're actually going to get in this film.
Yeah.
Um, so many different ways this could have just been a better film, and again, not that much change, but enough. And they just no, and that's the reason why probably it's kind of forgotten in the forgotten realms of people's filmography. They don't talk about, when you say Morgan Freeman or Chris Rock or even Renee Zellweger, Nurse Betty don't come up in the conversation.
No, but it's interesting because there's so many great actors in here, you can't help but think when they show up on screen, "Oh, I should go watch that other movie they were in." Like, towards the end of Nurse
Yes.
Betty, I was thinking about because 'cause they're in the hotel or the apartment, and Morgan Freeman's like, "Just give me the gun and let me get out of here, get a fighting chance," 'cause you can hear the cop sirens in the background. It's like, "I don't wanna end up like an old guy in jail." I'm like, "Oh my god, this is the secret Shawshank origin story."
That's the Shawshank origin. This is Shawshank prequel.
Charlie's nickname was Red. Yeah.
Oh my god! Suddenly, that just makes Nurse Betty so much better. If the fact that it's a prequel now to Shawshank. Yeah, there you go, folks. That's the actual origin story
Oh,
for.
and he was he liked, Nurse Betty because she kinda reminded him of Rita Hayworth. That's the
There you go. I could I could get behind this. I could, but unfortunately I can't get behind Nurse Betty either.
though you know
So
you want to. Sorry, that's terrible.
yeah,
Uh,
now let's behave ourselves.
supporting the movie. I'm talking about supporting the movie.
Yeah, exactly. Sure you are. Uh, but hope you enjoyed this conversation, and who knows, maybe it piqued your interest. Again, performances and everything, if you're fans of these performers, sure you can watch it, just don't expect a whole lot to make a ton of sense by the end of it, really.
Mhm. Yeah.
But what will make sense now is our license to shill that I give every one of my crew members. And tonight, Mr. Ian Simmons, the floor is yours. Please shill away.
Well, I'm Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com and also right here on YouTube. Just look up Kicking the Seat and you'll find me. I do weekly podcasts and interviews and live streams and all kinds of fun stuff. So yeah, look forward to having you. And also, I look forward to being back here on Monday night as I am every Monday night for almost half a decade. I can't believe it. And yeah, as I keep mentioning on my live stream, Mark has ruined a lot of modern movies for me by showing me classic, obscure movies that are so much better.
Which
Present film excluded.
present film exclusive. Well, they're not all going to be interesting films. And next week will probably be one of the most modern films we've covered on this show this year and in the last, excuse me, few years. Yeah, I believe it's called The Good Nurse, is from 2022 with names that even you younger folk out there will recognize, which I do know some of them. I got my Spotify rap, so I know our demographic, and there are some of those folks who are my son's age who listen to the show, which thank you everybody, by the way, to all our listeners. We've grown surprisingly a lot in the last year, and it's because of you folks out there listening and hearing us just ramble about films. So we appreciate you quite a bit. and the support and keep spreading the word. Thank you to our live viewers tonight who have been popping in and out. We appreciate you, and I appreciate everyone that's been on here. And yeah, next week, The Good Nurse. Look it up. It actually has I believe it's Timothy Chalamet and
No, it's Eddie Redmayne.
oh, sorry, not I get the two big skinny white guys. Anyway, Eddie Redmayne and is it
Jessica
Chastain?
Chastain. Yep.
Jessica Chastain is in that one. So that's next week, folks. So tune in for that. And yeah, until next time, we'll just say good night, everyone.